Yeah, like my palms are sweaty, and then like my knees are kind of weak, my arms are heavy. It's
Hey, I believe we're recording, man.
oh, hello. This is Convince Me. That was awful. Welcome in, everybody. Episode 44, finally, of Convince Me Show. I'm Andy Rutherford, joined as always by Mr. Brian Bennett, Mr. Casey Elrod. Gentlemen, how's it going?
Swing and a miss. That's all I'll say. Swing and a miss.
For the people that are listening and don't see the video, you might not be able to see, but it looks like there's some of Mom's spaghetti on Rudd's shirt right now.
It's not on my shirt, but this is an exclusive nobody knew. That was what we had for dinner tonight, and my child didn't eat it all, so there is some on the table behind me. But anyway, welcome in, everybody. Episode 44, finally. It's a little late in the week. We had some stuff come up that seems to be happening more and more lately, but it may be late, but we're still getting one to you this week. Hopefully next week we will be back on schedule. But like I said, episode 44, this one should be a fun one. But before we get into it, we're going to start the show tonight with our typical weekly shield. Make sure you guys are following us on all of our social medias. Probably our most active social media page would be Facebook, facebook.com/convince me show. Most weeks we have a preview of every episode over there. We haven't been able to do it the last couple of weeks, but most weeks you're going to find it there. And again, that's facebook.com/convince me show. Twitter, you can find us over there at Convince Me Show. Occasionally we get lazy. We let you guys pick the topics. When we do, the poll will be found on Twitter, so make sure you're following us there. We can also be found on Instagram, Convince Me Show over there at Instagram as well. Not a lot happening over on Instagram. Nothing special, no polls or previews, but if you're going to follow us on the others, you might as well follow us there. And then we are on YouTube, tinyurl.com/convince me show. Every single episode in video format can be found over on the YouTube. And of course, the podcast drops every week, most of the time on Wednesday. Not happening this week since today is Thursday. If you're listening to this, it's at the earliest Friday. But that can be found every week wherever you guys listen to your favorite podcasts. If we're not where you listen to your favorite podcasts, let us know. We'll do what we can to get there. So, all the shield aside, gentlemen, this week we'll just let the viewers in on a little more here. We had a discussion about what our topic was going to be this week, and we didn't know if we wanted to do music or movies. And so we kind of found a way to combine the two. And so this week, we're going to ask you to grab your popcorn because we're going to the movies, but we're going to movies that have to do with music because this week we're looking at the best movie biopic or best music biopic film that there is. And there's a lot of really good competitors in this category that we're not discussing, which leaves the door open for us to maybe come back sometime. But there's been some great ones just in the last few years. Straight Outta Compton, Bohemian Rhapsody, Rocket Man.
Ray.
What was that?
Ray Charles.
Ray was great. Get On Up about James Brown. That was a great movie. There's been a lot of great ones, but the two we're discussing today, I will be representing the great Johnny Cash movie, Walk the Line, and Bennett will be doing the at least semi, if not mostly, biographical film of Eminem, 8 Mile. And Elrod, you're going to be our mediator. What do you think about this topic as we get into it?
I love Eminem, but it's going to be hard to beat Johnny Cash. It's going to be uphill climb for you, Bennett. But we'll see. We'll see. I think you can convince me, especially with Rut representing the other side. So,
True.
how we're going to get started tonight to see who goes first. It's very simple. Get your pen and paper out. And it's very simple, like I said. Pick a number between 1 and 50. Closest, you can go over, you can go under. Closest number to this number I have written down gets to go first.
1 to 50?
1 to 50. What are you thinking, Bennett? What are you thinking? Got one in. One in for the win. One in for the win. All right. Let's see him. What you got? 25.96.
I knew that'd be Bennett's number, or at least the 25 part.
Right, with his own standby of 31. Well, I had picked this number earlier in the week when the show was going to be on Tuesday with the unfortunate news about my hero, Tiger Woods, but the number is 15. It's probably going to be his total number of majors. I believe Bennett was the closest to that number. So would you like to go first or second tonight, Sir Bennett?
I believe I'm going to go first.
Okay.
I'm going to go first.
Tell me, why is 8 Mile superior to Johnny Cash's Walk the Line biopic?
Yeah, I'm going to open this up with a question for you, Elrod. Okay? All right, here we go. Elrod, look, if you had one shot or one opportunity to mediate tonight's debate and pick one winner, would you make the right decision or would you just let it slip? Now, there's many great movies that we could have chosen, like Rhett said there in the opening. But in my honest to goodness opinion, I think it's really tough to beat 8 Mile. It's been out nearly 20 years, and the director, the late Curtis Hanson, and Eminem himself, they give us one of the greatest underdog movies to date. Mathers, he crushes his film debut. He really does. You wouldn't think this would have been his first film, at least a major film. And the soundtrack gives us one of hip hop's all-time greatest songs ever, which we'll get into a little bit, which is actually the only rap song to ever win an Academy Award. And a little fun fact for you: at the time of its release, it was the second highest opening for an R-rated movie in U.S. history. So tonight, we're going to touch on a few of these topics here that I think show really just how much of a masterpiece this gem of a film is. And hopefully by the end of tonight's episode, I will have convinced you why 8 Mile is the better film.
I like it. Love that song. That song is timeless. When did 8 Mile come out? Was it like early 2000s, 2002?
It was 2001, 2000.
If that song's on the radio, I'll listen to it all the way through every time. If I'm just
2002. It's 2002, I think.
Yeah. Love that song. All right. Right. Why is it Walk the Line?
Earlier this week, the day I thought we were going to shoot this show, which ironically enough would have been Mr. Johnny Cash's birthday this week, I went back and watched Walk the Line for the first time in several years. And it entrapped me just as much this week as it did when I saw it in theaters when I was in high school. And then several years ago. I've seen it several times since, but this movie, when it comes to music biopics, really set the bar. A bar that there's not a lot of movies that have come close to touching it in this really narrowed down genre of music biopics. And the thing is a lot of times with these movies, a lot of times people's normal everyday lives are pretty boring. If they made a movie about our life, there'd probably be some highlights in it, but for the most part, it's going to be pretty boring. This movie about Johnny Cash's life, a lot of the crazy things that happened in this movie came straight from his autobiography and were real. And matter of fact, there's a scene or two that I'll talk about later that Hollywood kind of dumbed down to make it not as extreme as it was. Just an incredible life this man lived, and then to take that incredible story, that incredible life, and put it on a screen, it really can't be touched. And I've got nothing against 8 Mile at all. It's a great, great movie. But I'll tell you this, Elrod, as sure as night is dark and day is light, Walk the Line is the greatest music biopic to ever be made. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we don't have to do the whole Facebook thing. There's no preview this week, but we are going to take a quick little break here for a word from our sponsor over on the podcast, and a slight half-second blank screen for those of you watching on YouTube. But we will be right back. And we are back, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Elrod, where do we go from here?
I'm going to start off with you, Rod. Tell me, I generally remember a little bit of the movie, but tell me what the core elements of Walk the Line in terms of the biopic are. What are the core elements of the movie?
Core elements of the movie, I assume you mean by the things that were accurately depicted?
Yes.
Okay. That, like I said in my opening, a lot of stuff in this movie is not very, there are some things, obviously every movie about that are biographical in nature, they're going to be Hollywoodized a little bit. But Johnny Cash's story in this movie, vast majority of this movie was a true story. His brother, when he was a young child, died working with a saw. And that really happened. When Johnny Cash was 10, his brother was 14. He died due to an accident with a circle saw. Their dad kind of blamed Johnny for not being there. And that is true. Of course, he's seen in the movie writing songs even as a child. All that was true. He grows up, he gets married. He was in the Army, he was married. It says in the movie that he's on the phone with his wife while he's deployed. And she alludes to the fact that he proposed to her after a month. That was actually dumbed down by Hollywood. They really dated like 2 or 3 weeks and he proposed. So he gets married, has kids. There's a scene in the movie, I'm trying to go through his life here, where he goes to Sun Records in Memphis and basically begs the guy to give him an audition and gets signed to a record deal on the spot. That actually happened. Johnny Cash went in and wanted to cut a record, and the guy said that not just anybody could do it. He'd have to audition. He said, well, let me audition. He brought in his band at the time, the Tennessee Two. They auditioned. Johnny Cash has a record deal that sets him up basically for the rest of his life, that really got him going through and into the music scene. Of course, there's a lot of depictions, and really a vast majority of the movie is his struggles with his drug addiction. A vast majority of that is true that you see. There's a scene where he actually, I'm going to hold that off. I'm going to say that in the next part. But his whole kind of courtship while he was still married, his courtship to June Carter, all of that was real. Maybe not as to the extent of the relationship he had with his first wife, but June Carter, of course, he ends up marrying. He proposed to her on stage after he had proposed to her 4 or 5 times, and she said no. He did it on stage, and she said yes. That's a true story. Really, a vast majority of this movie was true. The elements were true, and it was still intriguing enough for a Hollywood award-winning movie. So I'd say a vast majority of this movie are true elements.
Okay. All right, Bennett, tell me about the true elements of the movie 8 Mile. Is it as, I guess, accurate as Walk the Line in terms of its depiction of the events?
It's been a while since I've watched Walk the Line. Probably not as accurate of a depiction as Walk the Line was, but it does paint a pretty good picture of a young and up and coming artist that we know as Eminem. This movie is not exactly like a scene by scene summary of Eminem's life, but really a lot of the elements are there, and they're a lot of them are relatable between the character of Jimmy and real life Marshall Mathers. Real quick, some of the points here that are real. First, I'm gonna start with his mom. You know, in the movie, it shows the troubled relationship that Jimmy and his mom had. That's very real for Eminem's life with his mom, and it shows the addiction that his mom had. That was also really true, unfortunately. So yeah, he grew up in that kind of setting. Most of the movie shows, you know, him rapping in the underground scene. That's very true. You know, you've got a white rapper in Detroit trying to make it, which stacks the odds against you, and it shows that struggle that he had, which is very true. You know, he definitely had to earn his stripes. You know, it shows him with his crew, his friends, and they're all into hip hop. That's true. Hip hop for Jimmy in the movie 8 Mile, that's kind of his escape from reality. And many times Eminem, that's, you know, he said, you know, that was his escape, you know, to escape kind of the crummy upbringing that he had. He would use hip hop as an escape. And it really shows in the movie just the talent and the drive, the determination that Jimmy had. That was 100% Marshall Mathers right there. Fast forward a little bit, you know, the whole thing with the girlfriend getting her pregnant. That's true. She got pregnant with their child while she was living with Eminem. I think it shows him with Jimmy, and at the time Kim was 20, and I believe Eminem was 23 when they found out that they were going to have a child. And it really, you know, it shows a pretty decently accurate description of the relationship they had, not verbatim per se, but it shows that relationship there. A big one though is the shelter, the venue that they did a lot of the rap battles at. That's a real place, and that's the actual venue that Eminem would be at when he had like these rap battles, and that's where he got his start, was at that actual venue. I thought that was pretty cool. And lastly, the big one, the movie's called 8 Mile. 8 Mile is where he came from. That's where he grew up. You know, it gives us an impression of what it was like for a young 20-something Marshall Mathers, you know, just trying to make it in the world there. So that's some of the more accurate stuff that's in the movie there.
Brett, I'll go to you. You talked about the true elements of Walk the Line, but tell me about some parts of the movie that were maybe not so true and exaggerated.
Well, you know, I said this movie didn't have a lot that was Hollywoodized, exaggerated, but come on, it's a biographical movie. Everything's going to have something. And really, just a few of the key ones that really starts out. I talked earlier about how his brother died when he was a kid. His dad kind of blamed him. The movie really depicts his dad as kind of a drunk, abusive, non-caring father. And then as Johnny Cash becomes an adult, his dad is no longer an alcoholic, or at least is no longer drinking, but there's real friction in their relationship because his dad still blames him for his brother's death. And a lot of that is not true. There's no indication. This movie was based off of two autobiographies from Johnny Cash, and there's no indication that his dad was an alcoholic or his dad was abusive. And really, he always talked glowingly of his dad, especially in their older days. So while his dad initially, there was some blame on him for his brother's death, they didn't have this rocky, just combative relationship his whole life. That was really kind of Hollywoodized. Um, Something else that was really kind of Hollywoodized when it talks about, and I don't know if that's a true term, but it is now. But in showing a lot of his addiction and stuff, there's a scene in the movie where he passes out on stage and they have to rush to him and resuscitate him and it insinuates it's some sort of overdose. That never happened. While he did perform in an altered state more than once, he never actually passed out on the stage. That didn't happen. Just a couple of other things, two things really. The first one, there's a scene at his home where he's just got into it with his dad on Thanksgiving. He's trying to get this tractor out of the mud and he's pissed off, and the tractor rolls back down into the lake out in Hendersonville, Tennessee, and he gets out and he's messed up and all that. Hollywood actually dumbed that down because Johnny Cash did have an accident that involved his tractor going into the lake, but he actually almost died from it and had to be literally resuscitated from that accident because he was on the tractor when he was messed up. Hollywood actually dumbed that down. In the movie, he just fell back into the lake and he, hopped off the tractor and was fine. But probably the most Hollywood scene in this movie that's nowhere close to something factual. There's a scene where he's drunk and high and out walking, and he shows up at June's house and she says, "You walked all the way here from Nashville?" And he's like, "Yeah, blah, blah, blah." And then she kind of kicks him off and he keeps walking and he kind of passes out in the woods. And then he kind of wakes up and walks a little bit out of the woods. And there's these people building this beautiful home there. And then he buys it and that becomes his home. Johnny Cash did not discover his home in Hendersonville, Tennessee, because he had been walking from Nashville messed up out of his mind. That absolutely never happened. That's probably the biggest didn't happen in that movie.
Got my hopes up for nothing.
No, it didn't happen, but I wouldn't put it past him if it would have happened.
He walked a long line to get from Nashville to Hendersonville.
He walked to more than 8 Mile.
Yeah, quite a bit.
Touche.
Bennett, tell me some of the exaggerated or maybe untrue or false parts of 8 Mile, if any.
From what I got out of 8 Mile is there's not so much of stuff that's just grossly exaggerated or not true. Rather, there's a lot of stuff in it that are kind of like half truths, half lies. And there's also a couple that are completely off, but mostly, yeah, they're really just kind of a little bit skewed from the truth for whatever reason. Number one is his buddy, Cheddar Bob. He never really shot himself like in the movie. It said that this Cheddar Bob character was based off one of his actual friends named Robert Claus. and he's supposed to be the inspiration for the character, even though they have completely different personalities. They say his buddy, this Robert Claus, actually become a semi famous DJ called DJ Rec, and by all accounts, in real life, there's no account of this guy actually shooting himself in the leg. So that's kind of that's not true. Here's one that's kind of half truth. In the movie, they get busted for shooting a cop car with a paintball gun. Now, in the movie, Eminem's driving the car, or Jimmy's driving the car, and it's his turn. They're shooting paintballs. It's his turn. So what's he do? Well, he shoots a police car. And they get in all kinds of trouble for it. In reality, Eminem was involved in a similar incident, according to a police report. But the paintball was shot, but it never, and it didn't bust, it didn't break. And also, according to the report, Eminem wasn't the shooter, so kind of a half truth there. A big one, in the movie, it shows him growing up in a trailer park. He did not grow up in a trailer park, but rather a small, modest house. If you want to see the house that Eminem grew up with, it's actually on the front of his Marshall Mathers LP. The house that he grew up at is 19946 Dresden Street. And even to this day, a lot of people will go out to this house to see it, Another one, he didn't work at a factory. He did work in a modest job. He wasn't working for a factory in the automotive industry, but rather he was a short order cook for a local restaurant called Gilbert's Lodge, which I think is fascinating to think if, some of these locals, the people that were in the 8 Mile area, probably frequented this place a lot and probably had their food served to them or cooked to them by one of the greatest rappers to ever walk planet Earth. That would be a really cool story to tell your grandkids one day. Yeah, Eminem cooked me a burger. I think that's cool. It just blew my mind. Let's talk a little bit about B Rabbit. That's the name given to Jimmy in the movie. That's his nickname he gets, Bunny Rabbit. It's short for Bunny Rabbit, and that's the name that his mom gives this character Jimmy because of his big ears and his buck teeth. In real life, Mathers did kind of have larger ears, but instead of being called Bunny Rabbit or B Rabbit, he was actually called Mickey. So that's kind of a half truth there. A bigger one in the movie, Jimmy becomes responsible for raising his younger sibling. It's his little sister named Lily. Now, in contrast to real life, Mathers did become responsible for raising his younger sibling, but it wasn't a girl. It wasn't his sister. It was his little brother, and his name was Nathan. So that one kind of skewed a little bit further from the truth. And the last one is probably the biggest one, and it's the struggles versus the success. In the movie, it shows the character B Rabbit, and pretty much the whole movie is about Jimmy struggling to make it, struggling to get an album together, struggling to get a studio time, all this stuff. The truth is, by 1995, which is when this movie takes place, by that time, Eminem had already recorded an album called Infinite, and it was released in 1996. So, it shows Jimmy struggling and up and coming and, doing the grind and doing the struggle. I'm sure Eminem was doing the grind, but he was having a little bit more success than the movie kind of leads you on to believe there. A little bit more.
Right. I'll go back to you. Next two categories, we're going to talk about how the critics view the movie, and how the fans. So we'll start off with the critics. How do the critics, Academy, how do they view Walk the Line?
critics view Walk the Line very, very favorably. More importantly, they view the acting prowess of one Joaquin Phoenix and especially Reese Witherspoon. They look on them very favorably. If we look at the movie as a whole, it was nominated for a couple of Academy Awards. If we go to Rotten Tomatoes, which is a very much used source here when we're talking movies, got an 82% score, certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes by the critics. But really, when we look at as far as what the industry, what critics really thought of this movie, you look at the amount of awards that Phoenix and Witherspoon were, especially Witherspoon, were nominated for and won for their work in this movie. Joaquin Phoenix won a Golden Globe for his work in this movie. He was nominated for an Oscar. He was nominated for like 7 or 8 different award shows. I won't go into all of them because I haven't heard of some of them, but SAG Awards was one of them. He was nominated for that. Interesting note, Joaquin Phoenix won a Grammy for his work in this movie because it's actually him singing these Johnny Cash songs in this movie. Of course, really probably the biggest star of this movie is Reese Witherspoon's portrayal of June Carter Cash. And like I mentioned to you guys before we started recording, my goodness, did Reese Witherspoon look good in this movie. We talked about childhood crushes last week. She's like my all-time crush. I wasn't really overly familiar with her in childhood, but from about late adolescence on, it's all been Reese Witherspoon, and it's cool. My wife knows this because I have no shame and I don't hide things. But anyway, I'm veering off course. Her performance in this movie was fantastic. She was nominated and won an Oscar. She won a Golden Globe. She won a SAG award. And all these things for that movie. She was named one of the top actresses of that year of 2005 when this movie came out. And a lot of this had to do with this movie. So from a critical point of view, both the acting job and the movie, like I said, certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, it was very well received by critics.
All right, Bennett, tell me about how the critics view 8 Mile. If it won any awards, just tell me generally, how do the critics view this film?
The critics actually view this film in a very positive manner. Eminem was praised a lot for his performance and for his music, in contrast to Walk the Line. Joaquin Phoenix and Reese Witherspoon were professional actors. Eminem was not a professional actor, but you would not be able to tell from the performance he gave. I thought it was very solid performance for a first time on the big screen. We're going to go back to Rotten Tomatoes because I do believe we're going to change the name of our podcast one day to Rotten Tomato Debates or something like that. We'll work it out later, guys. But it was certified fresh as well, 75% from 213 professional critics, giving it a pretty positive review. Roger Ebert, a very famous critic, I think that everybody knows, he gave it 3 out of 4 stars. And he said that the movie stands aside from your routine debut films by pop stars. Another professional critic, Peter Travers, he gave it 3.5 out of 4 stars and said it's a real movie, not a fast buck package to exploit the hip hop fan base. And he went on to compare 8 Miles, that final rap battle scene. He compared that to the Rocky versus / Creed scene in Rocky. He compared those two. It was named number 2 in Billboard's top 10 best hip hop movies ever. And the song Lose Yourself won an Academy Award for Best Original Song in 2003, making Eminem the very first hip hop artist to win an Academy Award. Surprisingly, this movie about the struggles of some guy trying to make it in the rap scene, it's really applauded by critics. It's kind of surprising that you wouldn't think they would view it in such a great manner, but they do. So I was actually surprised that the critics liked it as much as I do.
Yeah, that's. I really haven't thought about it that way, Bennett. But I mean, Eminem was a singer. I mean, he was still an entertainer, but he was not an actor, and he's getting wide acclaim for his acting. That's impressive.
That
I'll
just
stay.
goes on to his determination. It said that he lost 24 pounds for the role of Jimmy during that time, which at the time, in 2002, Eminem wasn't a big dude to begin with.
No.
So 24 pounds is a substantial amount to lose.
Sometimes you just gotta lose it, right?
Just lose it.
I'll stay here with you. We talked about the critics, but tell me how the fans, especially the hip hop fans, view this film.
Yeah, so as far as debuts go, you couldn't really ask for a better one from 8 Mile and from Eminem. It opened at #1 with 51 million in the opening weekend, which is good enough to earn second highest opening for an R-rated movie in U.S. history. Not bad. Worldwide, it grossed 242.8 million. When it was released on DVD, it generated another 75 million in sales/rentals. Back in, you got to think, 2002, 2003, we were still renting stuff. You're still going to Blockbuster, picking up that 8 Mile on a Friday night, getting crazy. So 75 million in sales and rentals in the very first week, which made it the biggest DVD debut ever for an R-rated movie, believe it or not. Its sales also put it in the all-time top 10 for first week home video sales. And the cinema score polls conducted during that opening weekend revealed that moviegoers gave 8 Mile a B+ on a A+ to F scale. But the core demographic of people, which generally was, 21 and under, they gave it a solid A. So to me, it looks like when you add up the sales and the scores and the records that it made, or the records that it set, fan reception was pretty good for old 8 Mile.
Good. Indeed. Right. Tell me how the fans view Walk the Line. How does it differ from the acclaim it got from the critics?
Have myself muted
Earth
there.
to right.
I'm not a cat.
You are a cat.
I'm not a cat. It did get positive reviews from the fans. Now it didn't have the opening weekend that 8 Mile had, I will admit. It did only gross 22.3 million in its opening weekend, but it was also released the same weekend as Harry Potter Goblet of Fire. Which could have had something to do with those opening weekend numbers, because as a matter of fact, it went on to become, in its run in theaters, the highest grossing music biopic of all time for 10 years. So up to that point, it was the highest grossing up until 2005, and it held that slot for 10 years until Straight Outta Compton came out in 2015. And I will say both those movies, I contributed to the gross of both of those movies that I'm talking about in theaters. But so it did pretty well, especially going up against, Harry Potter. That first weekend probably killed some of the numbers, but it did make up for it. People did go back to the theater. I got on my favorite site that you hate, Elrod, and I got on Ranker.
Oh God.
To see what fans thought. And there's not a list about music biopics, which really frustrated me, but there is a list about greatest biopics about real people. And if you look through this list, the top 5, there's The King's Speech, there's Goodfellas, there's Chaplin, all great figures, all great movies, not movies about musicians. But at number 6 is a movie about a musician, and that is Walk the Line, Johnny Cash. So if you go by that logic, I'm going to say it's if there was a list for for the best music biopics, it would be number 1, judging by logic.
Maybe you should make one. Maybe you should make one on Ranker.
I give them enough plugs. I'm not giving them work. They need to get on that themselves. So, but yeah, I would say fans liked it pretty well.
Okay, fair enough. Final subcategory before we go to closing statements. Right, tell me how Walk the Line. Tell me how this film has affected the legacy of June Carter and June Carter Cash and Johnny Cash, if any. If it has changed their legacy, or if it hasn't.
Well, there's a saying, really, in any facet of life, that timing is everything. This movie was being made, pre-production had started while Johnny Cash was still alive. As a matter of fact, it was Johnny Cash himself who pushed for this movie to be made from like the mid 90s. And it never actually came out till 2005. But obviously before the movie came out, Johnny Cash died. And as we've seen before, we've talked about before, you're probably at your most popular and at your hottest right after you die. And the fact that this movie came out within 2 years of his death, people are looking for that. When someone passes away, especially a musician, we go back and we listen to their music. We go back and we watch YouTube clips of them playing or interviews. And I think the timing here was key because people still wanted that Johnny Cash. And I really think this movie let that stick around longer. And kind of built that legacy because people attached this movie to that instant nostalgia after his death. And I really think that's at least part of what made it such a big hit. And because of that, you hear these stories when people die. You hear stories about their lives. Well, within 2 years, people are seeing a movie about those stories. And I really think it ingrains it more in their memories to see that visual of that story. And because of that, I think it really did add on to the legacy of Johnny Cash. Because a lot of what people see and remember, they tie in to this movie. Now, obviously, it didn't have an effect on him, the person, because he had already passed away, but this was something he had pushed for. It finally happened. And the timing, obviously, you don't want the man to die. But as far as making it a success and making people remember it, timing was everything. So I really think it added a lot to the legacy of Johnny Cash.
I know that Eminem was popular before this movie, but tell me how the 8 Mile movie affected his legacy.
Yeah, a little bit of contrast to where Rut touched on the legacy of Mr. Johnny Cash. I'm going to touch a little bit about the effects it had on the person, the effects that it had on Eminem, Marshall Mathers. And there were 2 things that I found really, really fascinating about how this movie affected him as a person. He experienced some highs and he experienced some lows with this movie. First, let's talk about the good. It helped elevate his career. By 2002, Eminem was already a worldwide icon for his music. He by the time that 8 Mile came out, I believe we already had the Slim Shady LP, the Marshall Mathers LP, and that very same year, 2002, we got the Eminem Show. So he's already on his third album, or like at least, well, he had Infinite as well, but his third major album that we all listened to. But with 8 Mile, he makes his Hollywood debut. You see the face on the screen as opposed to just the voice out of the speakers. he enjoyed massive success at the box office. And I think because of this, he gained new fans that maybe didn't really listen to his music before, but then they appreciate the movie, and then they check out the songs. They see it in a different light, maybe have a different appreciation for his work. And another thing that it did is it probably brought back several old fans that listened to maybe the Slim Shady LP or the Marshall Mathers LP, and then maybe kind of walked away for a little bit. You see the movie, you're like, man, I love Eminem. You start listening to that music again. So by 2002, you have like peak Eminem at this time. The song "Lose Yourself," like I touched on before, Academy Award won for that and became the longest running #1 hip hop single ever. So, like I said, 2002, Eminem's probably already on top of the world in the rap game. You put him on the screen and it just elevates him even more. But that was all about to come crashing down majorly. And number two, I want to talk about how the movie almost killed Marshall Mathers. We almost missed out on a lot of great music. He said that there was like really long days on the set, sometimes 16-hour days. And if you know Eminem and you know the drive and the dedication and the work that he puts in, he gives it everything he has. So this 16-hour days of the stress and the demands that he met, it really caught up with him. And a direct quote from Mathers himself said, "One day somebody gave me an Ambien and it knocked me the blank out." You can fill in the blank there of what the blank was. And he was like, I need this all the time. He was having trouble sleeping. So somebody gave him an Ambien and he liked it. He liked it a lot. He got pretty hooked on prescription pills. His main choice of pills were Vatican, Valium, and Xanax. Sometimes he was taking 60 Valium and 30 Vatican a day.
Gosh,
that's an insane amount of pills, and it just took over his life. It consumed his life, and in 2007, he nearly died of an overdose. The doctor said that when he OD'd and was brought to the hospital, he had the equivalent of 4 bags of heroin in his system, and they said that he was about 2 hours away from dying. But he eventually got the help that he desperately needed. He befriended a Sir Elton John, who was kind of his mentor, and it was a very unlikely couple, but it seemed like they needed each other. And now he's been sober about 13 years now. But at the time of this movie and a few years later, there's a very, very dark time for Mathers there.
Wow, that's pretty nuts. I don't see how he made it out of that, taking all of his pills and crap. All right. So Bennett, I don't have any questions for either of you. This is a very close race. So I'll let you start us off first. I'll let you close first. Why, in your opinion, is 8 Mile superior to Walk the Line?
I've got some very good opinions. If my first statement here doesn't win it for me, then I'm hopefully some of these other statements will. But y'all should know by now that I don't watch many films at all.
No.
That should be pretty evident by now. Even I have seen this film and I like this film. So that should tell you something. If I've seen this film, it's a pretty big deal. We said, it's been 19 years since it came out and it still holds up today. It's a very enduring film. It's not one that you look back on and you're like, oh, I can't believe I watched that. That's so cheesy. It's not. It holds up. And the reason that it holds up is because it's a very authentic movie. It shows a little glimpse to not only his life, but the way of life that it was in the mid-90s growing up in 8 Mile in that Detroit area. it's sneakily a very solid film, and it garnered quite a bit of success. Some of the things we talked about was, the song "Lose Yourself," and also the soundtrack was very good. I don't really have time to get into the soundtrack, but a lot of the songs that he wrote on that soundtrack he did in between breaks on the set. It was very impressive. The critics loved the movie, which is very surprising from this type of film, that the critics would like this type of film. The fans loved it. I talked about a lot of the records that this movie set. The biggest R-rated debut movie, blah 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 blah, all that. When you add it all up, though, 8 Mile was nominated for 32 awards, and it won 11 of those awards. And big one being the Academy Award that he won. And I'm going to leave you with this little rhyme to convince you. Elrod, you better choose yourself this topic, 2 movies, better biopic. You only get one shot to make the decision worthwhile, and I'll do the job for you. The winner is 8 Mile.
Look at you. Bennett's going to be a rapper, right? Calling it. He's gonna, next Marshall Mathers right here.
I hope not. I'm too old for that.
Right? Why is it Walk the Line?
The reason that the winner here is Walk the Line, I'm not going to say anything bad about 8 Mile. I love 8 Mile. In 8 Mile, there's a lot of biographical elements to it, but the story of Johnny Cash, in and of itself, just the story, not even the screen version, it is so fascinating. But the way that this movie puts that insane, crazy story out in front of you at the time that it came out, really, you don't see that a lot. I think the biggest deal about this movie, the reason why this movie is such a outstanding movie and the best music biopic that there is the fact of just how true it is and how little things had to be Hollywoodized. You get, there's the story of his brother dying, and you look into it, and that really happened. You look at his drug addiction, that really happened, all these crazy things. And like I said, you add all that with the acting prowess of Joaquin Phoenix, the acting prowess of Reese Witherspoon, and just how dadgum good she looked in this movie should win it in and of itself. The fans loved it. The critics loved it. 8 Mile is great, but it's got to be Walk the Line. And Elrod, if you don't pick this movie, you're going to have to spend some time in Folsom, because it's going to be highway robbery if you go the other way here.
All right. Well, here's how I come to this conclusion. I like 8 Mile. I have not seen 8 Mile nearly as much as I've seen Walk the Line. Every time Walk the Line is on cable, I'll watch it. Not as much as Twister, mind you, but that's a given. I love the story of Johnny Cash, and I think you would talk about this earlier, right? About how there's a lot of stuff that happened in that movie where it's like that. It's almost too crazy to believe. If this was a fiction movie, you just wouldn't believe any of it because it's just so outlandish. Some of the things that happened in that film. I think I relate more with Walk the Line because the story, I know the story better.
Because you've got drunk and walked from Nashville to Hendersonville.
I have not done that. But it's country music. It's local stuff. I believe if you put these two movies up against one another, I think the critics would probably give more weight to Walk the Line. And I think the general public, for the most part, would give a little bit more weight to Walk the Line as well. So it's a very close race, but I got to go with the Man in Black tonight. And that is Johnny Cash and a boy named Sue.
I was really expecting that. The critics would give Walk the Line, the people would give Walk the Line, but Rudd argued it, so I'm giving it to 8 Mile.
Hey, I can change my ruling here if I want to. It's my show.
So basically, we're saying that Reese Witherspoon looked better on the screen than Marshall Mathers did. That's what it comes down to.
That was going to be my final judgment here. One has Reese Witherspoon, the other movie does not.
The other one had Brittany Murphy.
Are you really comparing her to?
I didn't even want to bring her up. But if it sways your decision before it's not a final ruling yet. I didn't hear it yet. So if this could sway your decision, the actor Michael Shannon plays Greg in the movie, which is the boyfriend of Jimmy's mom. Michael Shannon was not the first choice to get the part. The first choice to get the part of Greg, Jimmy's mom's boyfriend, is none other than Mr. Gary Sinise,
who
we know as Lieutenant Dane.
Can you imagine Gary Sinise in 8 Mile? I can't.
Damn, shut up.
It took an entire show.
It almost happened.
It took an entire show. It took post-closing arguments. But Bennett was not going to let this show in without slipping some sort of Forrest Gump reference in there.
It's not going to happen.
Was this one of your favorite episodes, Bennett?
It was. I can't go against the decision. They're both two really great movies. So either way, I'm cool with it. It was a lot of fun doing this episode. So yeah. Definitely one of my favorites.
There you go.
Here's an admission to both of you. If it hadn't been Johnny Cash's birthday this week, I probably would have went with Straight Outta Compton personally. But
an 8 Mile would have won.
Well, we may have to return to that someday.
Because I've never seen Straight Outta Compton.
Well, then that's your fault.
Yeah.
But I do want to say, for those of you longtime listeners of the show, we do send out our best wishes to Mr. Tiger Woods. But that Jack Nicklaus versus Tiger Woods thing that I said my opinion could change, we could come back to. I don't know that we're going to have to do that now.
I've got faith. I've got faith that he'll come back.
Never say never. I mean, it could happen.
Exactly. Never say never, right? Especially when I win a bet off of Tiger. Never say never. Did I ever give up during those 10 years? Did I ever give up?
You wanted
9 years. I didn't give up.
Anyway, all right, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to wrap it up. Either of you have anything you want to say before we shut this baby down?
I don't. I'm a man of few words today. I don't. It's a good episode.
It was a good episode.
Well, and hopefully next week, not only will we bring you another good episode, maybe, just maybe, fingers crossed, grab your rabbit's foot and rub it real tight. We'll get it out on time next week. Maybe not, but we're shooting for it. For Mr. Bennett, for Mr. Elrod, I am Rut, Andy Rutherford, or as Johnny Cash would say, hello, I'm Andy Rutherford. And we will see you guys next week. Until then, peace.